Aloha and welcome to joining us. This is The Art of Life and I'm your host, Willow Chang Leon. If you don't know by now, if you're tuning in for the first time, we broadcast live every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. here in the heart of Honolulu in the wonderful Pioneer Plaza. I am thrilled, stoked, pick an adjective, all of the above, to have today as our guest, Darron Cambra, poet, instructor, innovator in the house. Welcome and thank you for joining us. So as everyone knows, if you've watched our show before, we always like the creation story of how Spider-Man came to be. Right. How did Darron Cambra come to be? What stoked the fire of the interest of the affinity for poetry and the spoken word?
Well, I started writing poetry when I was a high schooler, senior year of high school, writing about like lost love and stuff like that, and writing in the back of notebooks. And started to develop it, started to feel more confident with it as a high schooler, but not really into the stage part, just the writing part. And so got into it, went away to college, got into creative writing, and it always was a passion for me, but I was always shy about the performance part. And so I hit some open mics and things like that, and always got good responses about the material, but the performance part I was always nervous about. And then came back home to Hawaii and started working with some youth at Youth Speaks Hawaii, and got really involved with that program. And part of that program is getting them on stage. And so as an educator, like, one of the things I think is very important is to do what you ask of your students. And so it really forced me out of my comfort zone and getting on stage, and so that helped in my development as a poet, adding a voice to my poetry and embracing that voice. And so that's really where it started. It started from the back of notebooks and writing poetry when I was supposed to be taking notes in class and stuff, and really working with that and getting feedback from friends and really like involving myself with the community to develop as a poet.
I enjoy that. You said some things that struck a nerve that I said, ooh, 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 in my head, just like Welcome Back, Kotter. I was like, I relate to that because I really started committing myself to writing poetry around the same time in high school. Right. Granted, we were at different schools because I think you're at an all-boys school. But writing in the back of the composition notebook, and I would actually carry that thing around kind of like Linus with his security blanket, and I wrote in it every day, and I wasn't aware of it at the time, but that was really a nice foundation of having a practice. I think people perhaps are under the impression that the muse just visits you and then you write one poem and it's like epic and amazing and suddenly you're Homer overnight, and that's not Homer Simpson, by the way, but it is a practice, and it is that ability to just keep that flow happening. Now that we've kind of moved into a digital age, whether we like it or not, what's your mode of choice? Do you just grab whatever's available? And I'm going to subject you to this later as writing on newspaper. Do you like to tap it out on your phone? Do you like pen to paper? What's your process?
I prefer pen to paper, but I'm not limited to it. I use my phone quite a bit when I'm not ready for the inspiration and just hits you. I like to keep a pad and pencil or pen on me, but it doesn't always happen that way. So with technology, that's one of the nice things. It's also a double-edged sword because I don't know, there's something I really like about taking pen to paper and taking your ideas raw.
Pressure,
it's but I totally agree. It's like you don't hit the ball out of the park right off the bat. It takes practice, and it takes working with stuff and feeling out your own writer's voice, and that's what a lot of it is. It's like I coach sports as well, and it's not like you get the skill right away. You've got to do practice. Before you want to do fancy layups, you got to do the left-handed layup, the right-handed layup, and all those things. And so writing is a lot like that. You've got to put pen to paper, and you've got to practice things out before you have stuff to present to people. And it took a long time for me to realize that, but it's a great learning process. It's a great learning process to learn about yourself and your feelings and your emotions and stuff. And that's one of the things I'm really thankful for, is that as a angsty high schooler and freshman in college and stuff like that, a lot of my feelings and my emotions I got to reflect on from a piece of paper.
Absolutely. So in essence, the written work becomes a reflection of self. It's very much like a mirror.
Right.
And I think what's really great is that it's a capture, just like a photo is a capture. I mean, it's a moment in time, and there's always the possibility that other people might relate because there's the human experience and all of that good stuff. But it's beautiful because just like a photograph, it's a reflection of who you are at that moment in time. And I think sometimes people, maybe they're afraid to delve into that process because they don't want to remember who they are, or when they've moved past that and they look at it, they kind of cringe and they're like, oh my god, I was self-loathing, I was fat, I was pimply, I was, whatever, I was into death metal, whatever their thing is. But I think it's essential because the person that we are today is it's all of those experiences that we've had in the past, and the poetry is a really nice way to reflect upon that. So, therapeutic issues. Do you find it's really helpful for your students to scratch pen to paper?
I do. I think that, especially like now I teach at an all boys school, but I went to a co-ed school. But now, especially with the with the boys, like it's great to like for them to reflect on what they're thinking and things like that, and see their thought patterns laid out, and I enjoy it because as a high schooler, I was a jock. I was a basketball player. The role of poet wasn't really allowed to me. It wasn't something that was cool. It wasn't something that was in at the time. And so, I got to live these two different lives and try to find a way to find balance. And as I got older, and I looked through some of my old material, it amazed me at the development of consciousness and the development of awareness that I was going through in life. And it was something that, had I not written it down, I probably wouldn't remember, the different times that I thought different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you said is really interesting because I have my students, when I teach dance, I make them do journals, and yes, they're graded because the class is for a grade. But it's really with the same purpose, and I explain to them that if they should be a pack rat like me and they hang on to this stuff, when they look back at it later, it gives them a little window into their psyche. And I know for myself when I've looked back at journals, and this is not a I'm so fabulous moment, but we are always in the process of creating our own mythology and maybe going through that emotional archaeology, as I like to call it. And so you look, when you're an adult, you think, oh, well, I've put in the work and I've read the books and I've gone to the workshops and I've had life experiences I've accrued to reach this point of consciousness or this emotional awareness. Then you look back on a journal from 15 or 20 years ago and you're kind of tripping. You'd be tripping. You're like, wow. I mean, you can see the little seeds of fruition that are planted. Like you see the essence of yourself just in your younger version, and because you took the time and the energy to commit to paper, you have something to look at. Fossils, if we may call them, fossils of the heart. Awesome.
Yeah,
awesome.
And those fossils get to fuel you as an artist later on in life. And
absolutely.
I love flipping back through my old material and seeing ideas that I thought about, but I didn't quite nurture, or I didn't quite let it flourish, and look back at it and use it again. Now that I have a different perspective on things, or a more mature perspective on things, sometimes not as mature perspective of things, but still, it's wonderful to see that self-development. Yeah. And that's something that I like to stress to young writers or writers that are just starting out. They don't even have to be young. The idea that, you're on this journey and no one's going to tell your story unless you do.
This is so true. Listen to that, friends. That's very true. You said something of interest, and that was about, starting your writing process in high school, as I did. At our school, we had poetry club. I'm grateful that it wasn't branded with that term because it sounds kind of hokey, and when you're in high school you're concerned. It was actually called late mail. Hello, Norm Hinley. And we would meet on Saturdays, so that will give you an idea of how devoted or insane we were. We would meet on our own time on Saturdays on campus, and everyone had their cup of coffee. I'm a green tea addict myself. They'd have their coffee in their thermos. This is way before Starbucks or whatever, and they'd have their notebooks, and you were encouraged to, or maybe required, to print out your poems and pass it out, and it would be like an elbow group. I've always loathed that term. I'm sorry. I know it's a very effective thing, but just, again, elbow group. And you would read your poetry for your peers who were there, and then they were supposed to be giving some very supportive, mindful, loving, critical feedback on what was effective or what could be worked on, what could be expanded, what seemed, just a little too much, et cetera, et cetera. Do you work in that same kind of format? I know you have a workshop on Sundays.
Yeah, I mean that writing community is one of the most important parts of developing as a writer, is that you get to put your ideas out there and get feedback from supportive people,
right.
And that provides a nurturing environment to develop. And you're right, getting that critical feedback from people that you trust is a very important part of it. If you just keep yourself balled up and you don't share what you have and stuff like that, then you're not going to have the opportunity to learn off of other people. And I think that that's very important as a writer. It's not copying other people. It's just learning what works for people so that you can develop your own path and find what works for you.
Absolutely. When you were saying that, I was thinking it's kind of like when you go to the museum or you go to a zoo or you travel, or heaven forbid, you go to the food court, you're exposed to different things, and it allows you to kind of be on both sides of the telescope. So I remember I used to have, maybe you start off and maybe you really like what you do and you're like, hey, I'm pretty good at this, and then you go to these groups and you're like, you see some people who are just like freaking phenomenal, and that's really subjective in the end. The flip side of that is maybe you think what you have is not so good, and then later you're like, hey, it's not so bad. You can get past some of that self-loathing. I know for myself, I was kind of the queen of the, it wasn't a haiku in structure or in form, but I always wrote things that were just kind of compact and succinct and to the point. And at that point in time, that was what was comfortable. And I enjoyed it, but I always felt like I would go to these events and people would write these long, page 3, page 4, and I was just thinking, my goodness. Now, I'm not really sure that it was necessary for it to be that long, but I remember for me, at the tender age of 15, feeling like, oh, look at my wimpy little 5-line poem, and everybody was very positive. It's interesting is that in that environment, no one made an issue of it being short, other than me. And then when I look back at it now, it's like, God, why was I self-loathing about the length of the poem? And I think that that's something that's so interesting, is everyone has to go through their process and realize that it's really not about the length. It's not about how fancy your vocabulary is. I remember sometimes I would think these poems were written with a thesaurus in hand.
Right.
How can I say, what's another word for fantastic? Hold on.
Right.
Oh, so do you find that, have you seen that progression of maybe quiet self-loathing into like an evolution of comfort in one's skin in workshops or in the slam scene?
I think that's where you find the balance of your own voice is what you're doing and what you see other people doing, and the reactions that both sides get, and how you can develop. You might think that your stuff is too short,
right.
But there's a talent in being concise. Like there's a talent in getting to the point. And there's a lot of poets and writers that are long-winded, and will refuse to edit down their stuff. Even if there's a 3-minute time limit, they're like, I'm going 4 minutes. I'll take the time penalty. And learning from different voices and different styles, I think, is so important, because
Absolutely.
then you get to hear and you get to see different perspectives. And as you're developing as a writer, I think that that's important, to appreciate not only what you do, but what other people do, and see how people respond to both of those things, so that you can best develop yourself in the direction you want to go, whether it's for self-fulfillment or whether it's to entertain a crowd, or just to become a better writer for other kinds of genres. Our poetry writing workshop is not just for poets. We have songwriters that come in, we have novelists that come in, we have journalists that come in, and the idea, we focus on the free write. The idea of getting your thoughts to the paper and accepting those as they are.
Right.
Putting it out there and then revising it. I tell my students, no poem is done until the poet's dead.
I like that. So just to let people know who are unfamiliar with the free write, it's basically letting whatever comes out flow. You don't have to be concerned with punctuation, with syntax, with the spelling. You just kind of flow and see what goes out there. And I know that a lot of writers, not poets exclusively, they use that as an exercise. So some people might do send salutations, or they do 10 push-ups. This might be how they write. Maybe they say, okay, from 10 a.m. to 10:20, I'm just going to do 20 minutes of free write and just get it out of the system, and then sift through it later and see what gems are in there. We have to take that break because that's what we do, first of 3, but we'll be back. So stay tuned. Use this as a chance to go get yourself a cup of tea. This is The Art of Life.
Castle and Cooke, Hawaii. Investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state. Collateral Analytics, empowering the real estate industry to make better informed property investment decisions. The Foreign Trade Zone, bringing the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone programs to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. Galen Ho, a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company. Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island. The Hawaii Energy Policy Forum, incorporating diverse perspectives to design a flexible and forward-looking energy strategy. Hawaii Energy, the state's energy and efficiency program created to help Hawaii's residents and businesses adopt a clean energy lifestyle. Hawaii Gas, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future. Hawaii Pacific Health, bringing technology and teamwork together to transform healthcare in Hawaii. The High Tech Development Corporation, attached to DBED, is the state's leading technology agency. The SHIDLER Family Foundation, supporting educational, cultural, and charitable organizations, including think tank.
Aloha and welcome back. This is The Art of Life. I am your host, Willow Chang Alion. Today we have a special guest, but every guest is special here. I wouldn't ask them to be in the show if they weren't. This is Darron Cambra. He's a poet. I'm going to give him the title of innovator and an educator, and he's here to talk to us about inspiration and writing and different tactical things that help the art of writing. So I made my little chicken scratch list. It's very ambitious to get through all of this, and I just say in advance we may not. I wanted to ask you, there's many different kinds of writing and poetry, and some of our viewers out there might know that, and I was thinking off the top of my head, there's ode on a Grecian urn. We've got prose, which is just super long poetry. Sonnets, you might know the Portuguese, or William Shakespeare, maybe these ring a bell. The haiku, 575, I'm sure there's variations on that I'm unaware of. What floats your boat? And then of course we've talked about free writes and slam poetry styles and things like that. What was like the thing that just motivated you? Did you aspire or did you practice any of these certain styles when you were at the university? Do they still speak to you, or do you think they're specialized or antiquated? What's your thought on these things?
I mean, the form poetry I think is great. The form poetry allows you to worry more about the expression because you know what format you're going to put it in. And so, it allows
like boundaries.
It allows you to fill things in and work with that. I have a tendency to lean towards free verse. And free verse is basically whatever you intend to be poetry is poetry. The rhyme scheme, it's not necessary. And line counts and things like that, you don't have to organize it in a certain way. I tend to use my free verse poetry to be spoken word poetry, and that's basically poetry that you give a voice to, that you speak out loud. A lot of people take that spoken word poetry and they compete with it, and that's what makes it slam poetry, is the competition aspect of it. But I like the idea of original thought and original patterns, and so with free verse it allows you that kind of freedom. So
I'm going to use the O word, not Oprah. It's organic, and I think that what that does is it again gives you that window and real insight into the individual who's writing. The form is great. I mean, everyone I think needs to have structure, whether it's jazz or sports or singing or cooking. You need to know some basics to help hone your craft. But I'm the same way. I have a preference for the freestyle. I wanted to ask you about slam poetry. For those viewers out there who might think they want to get into it, I think first of all, Does it always have to be memorized? Do you get docked for not having it memorized?
Indirectly, you do.
Okay.
One of the things is that the way slam poetry is supposed to run is that the judges, who are typically random people in the audience, are supposed to judge it on half performance and half content. And if you're reading it off of a paper, it naturally is going to affect your performance score. So although you don't get docked points right off the bat, I mean, I've seen poems off of paper or on paper get perfect scores. A lot of times that becomes a barrier between you and the audience.
Okay.
And so the memorization, I mean, it just helps with the performance aspect of it.
And for those of you who haven't seen this, maybe you might have heard of Def Jam poetry. So in the late 90s, correct me if I'm wrong, that was kind of like a thing. And I think a lot of people acknowledge that as a launching point for their interest into spoken word or presenting it in this format. And of course there's rap. Hello, if you haven't heard rap, you might have been living under a rock instead of on one. Have any of these things been of influence to you?
Oh, I love hip hop, and so like, you know, that's something that I listened to as a teenager and still do today. Not so much a modern artist, few handfuls, but you know, that hip hop aesthetic is something that always appealed to me. And so I'm a heavy rhyming poet, but as a free verse poet, I don't necessarily use the rhyme at the end. And so a lot of it is playing with rhythms, dependent on the rhyme, but not dependent on where I'm putting the rhyme.
Music and spoken word. Now, I might have some people say, Shay's wrong. I accept that. Aloe Black. I'm the man. I'm like kind of obsessed with this song right now. I will listen to it 6 or 7 times in a row. I bought it for $1.29 in iTunes. To me, so much of that delivery, and then he just performed it 2 nights ago on South by Southwest on Jimmy Kimmel, and I was surprised how much more, even live, that to me I was like, dude, this is spoken word. I mean, it's spoken word set to phenomenal music. It's not that he can't sing, but I thought this is really cool because I feel like it's kind of getting a new audience. Like in the 90s, there was Arrested Development, and there was Diggable Planets, and you had Dream Warriors, and yes, I like the really soft, artsy stuff, as you can tell. But I thought it was really cool that this song, which to me seems like spoken word, is like, you know, mainstream takes. Thoughts on that?
I love poetry and music, and it's something that I'm doing more and more every day. I do a lot of open mics that aren't poetry open mics, they're musician open mics. And I'll go up and I'll grab a few random musicians that have already played, or some people that I know, and we'll go up there, and like I'm one of those people that I like to let my cooks cook. I like to let my barbers, you know, pick how they cut my hair. You know, I let the people that are experts do what they do best, and I do the same thing with musicians. So, you know, I'll turn to them and I'll be like, play something. I've got a poem in my head that will match it, and we'll do that on the stage. And sometimes it works out great, sometimes it doesn't.
That's the beauty of live stuff.
Right, and it's, you know, and it's organic, you know, and so. And I, you know, the albums that I put together, one album, I'm working on the second one. You know, my albums are all poetry and music. You know, I've got friends that, you know, produce music from both Washington and Hawaii, and so we put together these combinations, and a lot of times they come out beautiful. You know, and so I was very proud of the first album, and what I did was I just sent the lyrics out to producers, and the Washington group, some people I went to college with, they made it a contest between each other to see, like, you know, who can up the other one on matching, you know, rhythm and music to poetry, and it was beautiful.
Okay, so you actually said a few things that made me say, ooh, let me look at my list about the collaborative process of poetry, because some people might think poetry is, oh, it's some dude writing it on a piece of paper and printing it, and then it's dead. Some people might think, okay, you write your poem, you do it a slam, the end. But there's many applications, clearly music, sharing it, competitions, publishing, what have you. When I was a young lass, there are these poetry collections. I grew up with poetry, and when I was younger, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, like Louis Untermeyer's Poetry for Children and things like that. And then went through the whole like E. Cummings and Walt Whitman and Norton's Anthology and Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, perhaps you've heard of it. I have like 4 versions of this chestnut. Persian poetry. Happy Nowruz for our Persian friends that might be watching. And this was kind of a common thing. You also see this in parabola. Like, there will be an illustrated attempt to show what the words are saying. Have you worked in this concept? Have you like had images projected on the screen, or have you asked people to put artwork, or do you feel it's complementary? Does it detract? Your thoughts on the matter?
Yes to all of that.
This is like a hurry with a little love seed.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
poetry is so versatile that, you know, there's a lot of different art forms you can work with. And On King put out an anniversary booklet a couple years ago, and they took some artists and they gave the artists work to poets and had us write based off of the images, and there was some great pieces that were written off of that, and I think it's called acrostic writing.
We did some dance. This is the declaration. So yeah, we did Spooky to spoken word, and we worked with Sequoia Carr Brown, and we did movement and dance to poetry, and then also many moons ago with Cialari, we did for Eli, so that was kind of heavy stuff. That was a dramatic interpretation, or not enactment, nobody died obviously, but trying to give visuals to the spoken word, which I think is equally as powerful. It takes, I think, a lot of discipline to know when to edit, because it can kind of get a little hairy and out of hand. That's just my 2 cents.
And that was a great project, because that was a poem to Eli.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful piece. My students have found that recently on YouTube.
Very pixelated now with the video quality.
But I mean, that was a great piece of expression and dance, and like you said, we've done that a couple times in projects, and I've done that with a few different dancers in a few different styles. You know, there's the expressive movement style. I had a more theatrical, interpretive male dancer work with another piece I did, which was also had a YouTube video, and it was a very hard story to write about and tell of some child abuse, and so we did that at On King one night. I've done poetry and pole dancing.
Wow.
Like, I didn't do the pole dancing. I had someone else do the pole dancing.
That would be heavy to pole. You're a big guy.
Right, that'd be hard to like stay on the mic and the pole at the same time.
Head mic, my friend.
Right.
You know, Brittany.
But I mean, and the expression and the collaboration is a beautiful thing, and it's something I really enjoy. I think more artists should get together and do what they do well with other people who do what they do well together. You know.
I agree. And even if you don't do it so well, you gotta start somewhere. Now, we have to take yet another break, but stay tuned, because we will have Mr. Cambra throwing down some rhyme for us now on The Art of Life.
Aloha, I'm Jay Fidel. This is Think Tech Hawaii, broadcasting live from the Pioneer Plaza in downtown Honolulu. We raise public awareness about tech, energy, and globalism in Hawaii. Technology is critical to our state. A vibrant tech sector will give us new prospects in the global marketplace and will offer great careers and make our economy more resilient. Streaming live on Ustream and Spreaker, ThinkTech allows its hosts and guests invaluable opportunities to report important events and discuss important questions, and to be heard here in Hawaii and around the world. You can find links to our live streams on thinktechhawaii.com or on our mobile website, m.thinktechhawaii.com. And you can see our archive on YouTube. It's all just a click away. We want to do whatever we can to keep Hawaii relevant, connected, and thriving in the complexity of the 21st century. We hope you will help us in those efforts. Tune in today. This is Think Tech. I'm Jay Fidel.
Aloha and welcome back to The Art of Life. For some reason I have forgotten that I'm supposed to look at camera too, so I'm making an effort now on this last leg of the segment here. We have Darron Cambra in the house. He is a poet and an educator, and he also is a producer of events. We'll get to all of those things a little at the end here, but I'm going through my little list because I wanted to be prepared as some questions that are of importance. You mentioned before angst as a motivator, as a young person when you're writing your poetry, and I think that there's a huge association of that. Like, oh, if you write poetry, you just make me full of angst, and you're miserable, and you're sad, you're self-loathing, etc. Did I say angry? And then I think the flip side of that is a lot of people maybe are exposed to poetry, and it's always under the pretense that it has to be romantic, that it has to be about love, and it has to be mushy and flowery and gushy and all those things. It's so much more than that. So what do you use as talking points to get people to realize that poetry really essentially is life? It's the art of life.
Well, I mean, that's the universal thing about poetry, is that there are so many different moods and tones that you can take with it, that it really is a universal art form. Like, you might not be able to relate to every poem you ever hear, but
Right.
there's going to be a poem out there, there's going to be a bunch of poems out there that you can relate to. And I think that successful poets, like any other writer and a lot of other expressive artists, have more than one tone in the same piece.
Absolutely.
And, you look at comedies and stuff like that, it goes in waves.
Yeah.
There's happy, funny parts, and then there's a really sad part, and then there's a really happy part, to end off the movie. And I think successful poems do that. They take something serious. They might have one or two punchlines in there to alleviate, like, the audience going through this journey with you and being all sad about it, or being all angry and fired up about it, and then you throw in a little punchline to kind of clear the energy.
Right.
And then get back into it. So if you're writing and you want to be successful about it, it's a good idea to not just go in one direction in the same piece.
Agreed. And I just want to throw out just a few names that people may or may not know in the collective realm of poetry. So forgive me, my references might be a little old, but we mentioned E. Cummings. He was kind of like my savior, because it's like, yay, nothing's capitalized. I love the informality of his written work, and how he could make saucy things very playful and kind of go under the radar of how provocative they were.
Mm-hmm.
Emily Dickinson, I think every female knows about Emily Dickinson. And when you're angry, you get into like, Sylvia Plath and Dorothy
Mm-hmm.
Parker. I mean, but hey, Dr. Seuss, I mean, that's ramen right there. And every child, I think, in America is exposed to this. Shel Silverstein, who writes so many different kinds of written works that are intended for kids, but if you read it, he's got some like serious stuff.
Oh yeah.
The Giving Tree. And then I was thinking about Sting and Paul Simon, and some people would say throw Jim Morrison in the mix, and of course Bob Dylan. I mean, there's Joni Mitchell. There's so many different ways that poetry really is integrated into our lives. So it's not so scary. Like, I want to know, who floats your boat? I mean, Mara Angelou, hello.
A lot of the names you mentioned, and I want to point out like how diverse their message is in just one piece. I mean,
Yeah.
Dr. Seuss was a political poet. I
Right.
mean, you look at some of the pieces he put together.
The Lorax.
The Lorax was an environmental piece.
Yeah.
The butter, the bread butter debate was about the
Yeah.
Cold War.
Yeah.
They were arguing about what side they butter the bread on, and they built up a whole arms to fight over this simple concept. When in reality, it doesn't matter what side you butter it on. It matters what side, you're still going to eat it. And, Shel was the same way. He'd take he'd put cheery little rhythms together and have, some serious things happen inside these poems, kids feeling alone or feeling like no one listens to them and things like that. And he puts that into a cheery format. And I think that that's such an amazing thing to do. And that's, and I think that leads to a lot of success, because you allow for people to relate to it on so many different levels. You put different levels into things, and people can latch on to small parts of it and really be inspired by that.
What he said, ladies and gentlemen, what he said. Okay, looking through the list. Okay, I'm of two minds of this, but because we're keeping it real and it's live, I read this as I was drawing on my eyebrows, getting ready for the show, and I had some things playing around in my head, and this is indicative of what you do when you're writing. You just grab whatever nearby. And the impetus to write this was, let me see if I can read my own handwriting. I can't. A reason is not the same as an explanation. I was thinking about that. And you can debate that as much as you want, but I really liked this idea. A reason is not the same as an explanation. So I'm just going to read this. This is so raw, and this one day might actually turn into something other than me reading it to you on the show. Untitled, because I don't have a title yet. If he were to die today, I wouldn't know what to say of the person he was yesterday or the man he aspired to be tomorrow. I couldn't explain away how years grew from a day, estrangement, rearrangement, the severity of the severing of the tree from the branch to the root. It almost feels moot, but I can't give up, won't give in. No white flag flown here. Just because he doesn't call doesn't mean I can't hear. A reason is not the same as an explanation. I no longer fear that the memory of truth lingers, that one isn't one. I accept it as truth. Woo, that's kind of rough. But I still care. I'm still here. Oh, he pulled out the roots, but the memory of truth lingers. Sorry, I got a little mixed up there with this funky little arrow. I can't say who that's written about, but it's someone I'm related to. So it's not my husband. So just to make that clear for all of you gossip mongers out there. And this was really cool. So I'm going to sound like the biggest fibber because at the beginning of the show I said, oh, the inspiration doesn't just happen to pull out from the sky. But I feel like the only reason why I have a level of comfort where I can just grab a pen in my drawer where my toothbrush is, because that's what I have all the scratch paper, and write something is because I've, on a daily basis, made an effort. Who's humming? It's me. Sorry. I can grab a pen and just write what comes, because the channels are open. It's kind of like when you have a storm drain and you clear out the leaves so things can flow. Like if you don't clean out the storm drain, there's not a lot that can flow. So the inspiration can come. It's not necessarily perfect. This has to be tinkered on. But what would you say, if anything, you feel compelled to comment? It's hard because there's only one of you instead of a room of people.
I mean, the main thesis, that opening statement, that not the first statement in the poem itself, but the one that you addressed at the beginning, I think that there's so much power in that. A reason is not the same as an explanation, and I think that it speaks to what we do as poets. You know, we're spilling our hearts out, but a lot of times we're spilling our hearts out in a revised way. You know, we paint the picture to make it, you know, as pretty or as accessible or as much truth as we want to put in it before we speak that truth. You know, we get to hone our own truth. And so I think that that's an amazing idea right there, that because, you know, the reason that you tell yourself and the explanation you tell someone else isn't always the same. It's never the same, you know. And so it allows, you know, it identifies that gap between the truth, you know, and I think that speaks a lot to what we do as poets, is showing the gap between your truth and the universal truth through your writing.
And as I look at the finger gestures, as I was walking here from the parking lot, I was thinking about this process, and it's like, you know, some people think that the only way to be known as a poet is if you partake in a workshop or you're in a slam or you're published. But I mean, for myself, I know that I've reached a point, if I write dozens of things and they're just like sitting on my hard drive that's been back up your data, I just feel a sense of relief knowing that I wrote it. I mean, I would love to think that maybe something I've written helps somebody else if they relate to that emotion or they've gone through that experience. There's something helpful and therapeutic in that measure. But I don't really, even though it's me, I don't think of it like, ha ha ha, I'm me. I can't wait to be on the cover of like Poetry and Writers, you know, magazine. Do you find that, are there poems that you kind of maybe save for yourself, or you just squirrel away, or they're not ready for prime time, or is the goal always to share it or to have it published, or what's the motivation there, I guess?
There's a mix. Like there's some poems that I've written and put in chapbooks that I don't do on stage. You know, the truth is not something that that individual truth is not something that I'm necessarily comfortable putting on stage. You know, but it's a piece that I've shown other poets and encouraged them to put like equally hard to talk about truths up on stage using that piece. But you know, and that's part of the balance. You know, some pieces are going to be meant for sharing, some pieces are going to be meant for holding on to yourself.
Right.
But you know, that idea, I love that we're talking about the idea of truths and things like that, because the first album that I put together was called True Confessions of a Compulsive Liar. And it has to do with that. It has to do with the idea that we as artists, we polish the truth and put it out there, you know, and it's the same with, you know, graphic artists or painters and things like that. You know,
crocheters.
Right. They all, you know, they all want to put their truth in the best light, and that's what we do.
I heard the omniscient voice of God saying that we have to take another break. There's never enough time on the show. I promise when we come back, we're going to have 100% Darron Cambra reading some rhymes, telling you about how you can evolve in the scene and things that are up and coming for the spring season. Ow! On the Art of Life.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Horry for Think Tech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
Welcome back, and this is The Art of Life. As you know by now, we have with us poet Darron Cambra. He's an educator and also an event producer, launching into some new projects. He's going to read some original poetry for us right about now. Tell us what you'd like to share.
So I'm going to share with you guys a poem called Plantation Generation, and it has to do a lot with my family history, starting with my grandfather and my father and myself, and kind of the importance of education through the family. My grandfather, well, I mean, we'll hear it on the piece, but this is I'm going to play some music that's going to accompany it on the album, and it was put together by Slow from Temple Valley, amazing producer. He put together my opening track on the first album, Cliff Diving, and he put together another piece called Aloha State of Mind, which was the remake we did of Jay-Z's Empire State of Mind.
Right.
And it's got Jamaica Osorio on the vocals, the Alicia Keys part, and he went in and he redid all the music to be traditional Hawaiian instruments. And it's just a beautiful project. The Honolulu Weekly, rest in peace,
Glory, we need you.
they awarded it best remake of a popular song a couple years back, and it was a great project. I was very proud of it, and it's going to be the first thing we release off of the next album. But I wanted to share this one, Plantation Generation, because it talks a lot about my attitudes towards education and where that attitude came from. So I'm going to hope that it's picking up. My grandfather went to war and back to get off pepakeo plantations. A bullet shattered his cheek and tore out his back, crawled to base until cuticles cracked, sent to military hospital to recover. In Germany, befriended an enemy who became a bedside neighbor and a lifelong correspondence, just the kind of man he was. But not a response from home. His lover kept unopened letters stashed away. She didn't want him to leave, so instead of grieve, she leaves the letters sealed in a corner, like her heart tucked in a chest. Edmund Cambra loved to learn. But on pepakeo plantations, goals don't stretch past the next harvest. Dreams are the hardest because Icarus views of plantation stores and fields causes the wax to wane before morning light sneaks through window panes, mourning the morning again. Edmund was offered an education, in town, off the plantation, but his father rejected the gesture. Couldn't let one of his sons run off and learn. Fields need to be turned, teenage muscles burn, and sugarcane learns to fight back with every machete hack, slashing across where paper cuts could be. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, recruiters came to camp, and Edmund was one of the few who could sign more than just an X. On a German pasture, just like any other, my grandfather learned that scouts and snipers don't mix, and he was left for dead. Only him and God knew different. There is no confessional quite like a quiet foxhole. Scenic fields feel different, crawling on your belly, afraid of yelling in pain or for help. My grandpa's hardest footsteps are marked with bloody palm prints and fingernails impaled, and every next step dug in the soul. But there was a woman at home, and sometimes that's enough. Purple-hearted in tow, he headed home and made my father and gave him 2 brothers. See, my father was born plantation poor, where you needed to hustle for newspapers if you wanted to teach yourself to read, where your daily chores caused you to bleed, where you could have everything you could want and not enough of what you need. This is where my family tree sprouted its seeds. My grandfather killed grandfathers to see farther than the plantation. And I'm sure in his nightly conversations with God, he promised to never put his future generations in similar situations, determined to provide his offspring the opportunity for education. Ronald, my father, went further than island dreams, a local boy pursuing goals over an ocean, hoping to open doors locked to his dad. Being the first Cambra etched on a Hilo certificate was not enough, and Grandpa said, what's next? So he was deployed to UH Manoa. And after the flashes, decorative sashes, Edmund stashes that degree to be hung and displayed and said, what's next? So in Washington, he found his other half and came back home and made a family. Kicking and screaming, I'm following my parents' footsteps, but in my own path. Part special needs, part higher education, part classroom, part administration, with no union for a poet mentor. So I fly without a net. Earn student respect, part for what I'm teaching, part for making it poetic, and entirely because I give it back. And now I'm proud of what I do. Help teens through hard times, do raw rhymes and free writes. But if you were to tell the teenager in me that I would grow to be a teacher, the class clown in me would have thrown something at you. The poet in me would have said, the jock in me would have given you a wedgie, and the poet in me would have said nothing. Because at 17, I did not see a future in my feelings, did not believe that poetry could provide like a jump shot. But in basketball, you only need one bad fall to end it all. But in poetry, bad falls make for more poetry. So I've got a litany of potential literature. But what I've really learned, doing what you love is more important than doing what you're told. So if you're gonna break molds and rules, you need the tools to build a brighter tomorrow. So I use poetry to reach a generation with failed education but a passion to learn. And when it's their turn, take the bridges we've burned and build from the ashes. Wish on eyelashes. Equality becomes our equation when you leave no child left behind, stuck on plantations.
Epic every time, Darren. Epic every time.
Thank you.
Really, that's just. Whew. I have to wrap up soon. Hell no! Did I just say that? Okay, we're gonna fade out here. Now that is definitely the culmination of many things. That's your honesty, that's your heart, that's your hard work, that's your effort, that's your practice right there. I mean, we're walking the walk and Lord knows you're talking the talk. How can people get involved?
Well, we have a writing workshop at On King. We're going to be doing it twice a month on the first and the third Sunday starting next month. So we'll finish up this month doing it every week. But scheduling, since we're starting a new show and things like that, we're going to move it to a first and third Sunday format. So that's at On King. It's on the corner, close to the corner of King and River. It's a great performance art studio. We do a writing workshop that starts at 8 o'clock. Well, doors open at 8 o'clock. We start when poets get settled. And then there's an open mic that happens afterwards, and that open mic's for any performance artist that wants to get on stage. It's a beautiful, welcoming community, a great place to get used to being on the stage, because the stage is scary, you know. The stage is a very intimidating place. So like, this is a great place for people to get their feet wet into it. The new slam that we're going to be starting is going to be happening at Hawaiian Brian's. They just renovated it. It's got
it's beautiful.
Yeah,
I've seen it.
It really is a gorgeous
They just spent
spot.
several $1,000s on their sound system, and the board is a lot. It's amazing.
Yeah,
the lights
so-
are amazing. Everything there is
Yeah,
really good.
it's cool because they got 2 performance
Yeah.
spots. So we're going to be starting off in the side part of it, and then hopefully, you know, with the interest, you know, gaining and the momentum moving, we'll move to the big one. But that's going to be every 4th Friday starting in May.
That's on Kapi'olani Boulevard, right next to 24 Hour Fitness.
Right.
Behind there. So parking, all that good stuff. Available, accessible. How about website?
Website, we are revising the website, but it is pourwettree.com.
Clever, clever.
Yeah, so it's so there'll be new announcements and things like that happening there, and some other performances around town. You know, special shows. I do a lot of fundraisers for causes that I believe in. So,
Right.
you know, homeless youth or violence against women. You know, those kind of things. So we'll keep up to date on those kind of things. So there's a lot of things that go on that we do, not necessarily on a set schedule.
I think we have an image of your crew in tow.
Yeah.
Can we cut away to that so you can just see these happy, happy poets? I don't know if you hear me. Hello? Looking for an image?
Oh, there's
that's
an
not
image.
gonna- Hey, there we go.
Okay, so yeah, that was a Girl Fest event over at University of Hilo.
Okay. Okay, and then can you cut away to a group image? We just want to see, we want to share the love there.
That's an open mic. So I do open mics around town as well. That's at the station on Mondays. There's two great open mics, Anna Bananas and Stations, both happen on Mondays.
Okay, and we have one last image, and then we gotta fly out of here. Look
And
at
that's
that.
us at the national. That's that's Youth Speaks Hawaii.
You look like a surly bunch.
Yeah, that's at a national tournament.
Well, Darron, it's been awesome. We must have you again for sure.
Definitely.
And thank you for doing what you do. And
Thank
stay
you for having
tuned.
me.
We've got more programming. Join us next week on The Art of Life, and join us on Facebook, Art of Life, Willow Chang. Aloha.